Wow, top 64 decks from Chicago. My goodness, am I excited to look at these. Look at the amount of decks we have to look through. You can see the different splits on the archetypes here with 22 decks for Ruby Sapphire. I called it to be the best deck in the format. I stand by it. 13 decks for Emerald Steel. I think a lot of you are going to be surprised there's not more, but I really don't think Emerald Steel is going to have a strong day 2. I think all of the decks that are at this stage, if you can't beat Emerald Steel, why are you playing the deck? That is kind of the power that Bucky has. The meta is warping around it. So I think that Bucky might struggle on day 2, but we're going to have to wait and see. There's also some decks which aren't playing Bucky, by the way, which we're absolutely going to take a look at. 9 Sapphire Steel decks, at least one in there that doesn't play a whole new world, which is fascinating. 8 Ruby Amethyst, 2 Ruby Amber, 2 Amber Steel, one of which came first, by the way, and the other of which is a Mufasa deck. What? 2 Emerald Amethyst decks, one of which came second, 1 Emerald Amber and 1 Amethyst Steel, which is actually a Jafar deck. Now, 1,000 players in this tournament, so half the size of the Lorcana challenges in Lille and in Atlanta. So it was easier to make the top cut, so do bear that in mind. But of course, still the top 64 players out of 1,000 players is an incredible achievement. This is where the very best of the best players are playing as well, and this is where the very best players have those secret decks to try and break the meta. First up, we're actually going to look at a deck not in the top 64, and we're just going to mention it because I want to give a shout out to Zan Saeed, who was a player that got the top 8 in Atlanta and has a Golden Mickey to their name. And they were on the main stage and their deck caught my eye. They were very, very close to making the top cut, just missing out. And they had an Amethyst Steel deck. I'm going to have a deck guide on my version of this very, very soon. I recorded all the games for it yesterday. Super cheap deck. My version is around $100, and I think it's right up there. Zan's deck is more control heavy than mine, with cards like Pinocchio and Robin Hoods, whereas mine is a little bit lower to the floor with cards like Pascal and Magic Broom, the 1-drop, which is drawing your card, Chernobog's Followers, Sorcerer's Spellbook. I think this deck is really, really good into the metagame. I'm a huge fan of it, and it was awesome to see Zan with a similar idea to me, and very unlucky to just miss out on that top cut. My concern with Zan's build, it's too slow into Ruby Sapphire. As soon as I saw it, I just felt like it was going to be too slow into Ruby Sapphire. Whereas my deck is very, very good in that matchup. I think Zan's going to really struggle. Zan should have probably a slightly better matchup into Bucky because you can answer the Ursula Deceiver of All with Pinocchio. But overall, Steel with Amethyst, you get the Bengers to deal with the Fishbone Quill for Ruby Sapphire, and you get the Babooms to deal with the Diablos, and the Tinkerbell as well to deal with Bucky. Deck guide coming soon. Look out for that. I'm really, really excited. It's paper gameplay. I recorded that all yesterday while I was watching the games. Also worth mentioning, we have a watch party for day 2 of Chicago. So if you want to watch the games alongside me, I'm going to be live streaming later on. All right, let's look at the decks then. Top 64, we've got Amber Ruby, which we're going to start off with. 2 Amber Ruby decks. This one has Mufasa in the mixer. Let's look at the amount of songs or non-character cards, shall we? 3 Brawls, 3 Be King Undisputeds, 1 Be Prepared. So 7 cards, about 10%, slightly over chance for your Mufasa to miss. But of course, that's not really too bad at all. I think that you have to play Brawl. I think also Be King Undisputed is just such an amazing card. This deck is very, very interesting. I also have tried building Ruby Amber a couple of times. One with Mufasa, one without, where I go heavy on the aerial and the songs. And I think some kind of middle ground can make a lot of sense. The Be King Undisputed card is, in my opinion, just such a powerhouse. Obviously, the Milan with the Shift Milan, great option. Very interesting to see that there's this 2-drop Pegasus. This is in there as a hope to deal with Diablo. The concern is an opponent can play Diablo and then sing something like Let the Storm Rage On to remove the Pegasus. So I'm not very high up on these cards which cost 2 and only have 1 or 2 willpower. There is a 2-cost Magic Broom in Steel, which is a 2/3, which has evasive in your turn, which cannot be removed by Let the Storm Rage On. I think that's a more interesting option, and that is a card which is in quite a few of these decks, surprisingly. Overall, really interesting build. The Peter Pan, which has Rush and has more strength if Tinkerbell's in play, but there's no Tinkerbells. That doesn't seem optimal to me, if I'm honest. I do like, though, to see that there's this Sisu in the mixer as well as the Shift Sisu. I think that's really interesting. Personally, I would like to see the other Sisu in here as well. The 3-cost Uninkable Sisu, as well as the 2-cost Flynn Rider Frenemy to give yourself some early game aggression and early game lore. That's probably how I would play it. But I do really like the idea of playing this 3-cost Sisu as well as the big shift Sisu. Overall, very, very interesting deck. Definitely a few cards I personally wouldn't play, but really good to see Mufasa performing well. Awesome to see. Big congrats to Hans for making day 2. Up next, we have a hybrid control deck. Now, this is probably something more close to what I would play. This is a really, really fascinating list because there's no Mufasa, but there's also no Ariel. And I think it could be the way to go. I was building the deck yesterday with Ariel, and I don't know, man. It's kind of forced. But this is more of a hybrid. Frenemy is in there, which I like to see, as well as this 3-cost Sisu. Really good early game lore potential. Not playing the other 3-cost Sisu, and also not playing the big shift Sisu, which makes sense when you're not playing Mufasa. You can go for things more like Be Prepared. 1 Chernobog, which I love to see. I have 1 Enchanted Chernobog myself, which I was playing in this deck when I was testing it, or a similar deck. We've got Goofy in here for some more early game aggression. There's no Ariel, despite playing Teeth and Ambitions, Bare Necessities, as well as Be Prepared, and Be King Undisputed. There's not that many songs you're often going to want to play. Agrabah is fascinating to see. Not a card you would expect to see whatsoever, but okay. There's a Moana in here, which has Evasive. That's going to be good at dealing with Diablo. 2 You Have Forgotten Me's for a bit of discard. Of course, 4 Rapunzels. 3 Tremaines, 3 Medusas, 2 Surfer Stitches. Really fascinating. I do think that Ruby Amber has a lot of potential still. It really struggles into Bucky, in my experience, even with this Pegasus. As I mentioned before, I don't think the Pegasus is doing much against Diablo, but it's really, really fascinating to see 2 different takes on these lists. Ruby Amber, for me, it's a little bit short of where it needs to be, but I'm really happy to see 2 slightly different versions making the top cut, and 2 really interesting builds as well. Good job to both of these players. Up next, the top deck from the first day of Swiss is Amber Steel Songs. What? I thought Amber Steel Songs was dead. Well, it's the only Amber Steel Songs deck in the top cup, but big congratulations to Zach Bivens, who is an incredibly strong player, is very, very well known. I also believe got a Mickey. I could be wrong. They certainly made the top cut on the Atlanta Challenge event as well, and has got incredibly good tournament positions. The biggest thing that jumps out here is it's Sleepy's Flute and Pride Lands. Now, I think you have to go Sleepy's Flute in this metagame for Amber Steel Songs, because otherwise you're just going to lose to Ruby Sapphire. And Pride Lands is also a really interesting option as well. Usually you would see either Sleepy's Flute or Pride Lands or Lanterns or none, but Zach in the set 4 metagame has got both Pride Lands and Sleepy's Flute, which is going to be potentially quite difficult for Ruby and Sapphire to deal with, particularly if they're not playing the Scar. Pride Lands is pretty difficult to remove in one swoop. The other big thing that jumps out is in terms of an inclusion. I don't think there's one set 4 card here in Ursula Vanessa, which is of course able to sing all of the 3-cost songs as well as the Zeus. But the other big thing which jumps out is the World's Greatest Criminal Mind. 3 copies of that. That seems like it's probably a card teched at Ruby Sapphire matchup again. Of course, there's synergy there with the Queen, where you can give your opponents extra strength with the Queen to then allow you to remove it with World's Greatest Criminal Mind. But the Ruby Sapphire decks with cards like Maui, cards like Maleficent, Monstrous Dragon, do have an abundance of targets for World's Greatest Criminal Mind. So that's really cool to see lots of copies of that in there. If I'm honest, there is one thing I really don't like about this deck. Have a guess. What are you thinking? It is, of course, only 2 copies of Cinderella. I'd be really interested in asking Zach why they decided to do that. Cinderella, okay, there's no big shift target for Cinderella in this list, but 3 copies of Ursula, only 2 copies of Cindy. Let's compare these cards and talk about the upsides and the downsides. Well, obviously, the biggest one, Ursula Vanessa can sing Zeus, but you can actually argue an even bigger upside is that Ursula Vanessa is not easily removed, whereas Cinderella can be hit by things like Baboon, which is very, very popular in this metagame. So I would wager that is why Zach has gone for Ursula over Cinderella, because, you know, I think you could make a case to play 4 Cinderellas and maybe 1 Ursula, for example. But really, really cool to see Amber Steel Songs doing well. I have a feeling it's going to struggle in day 2. I think this deck is going to be really good into Bucky. But as we've seen in the top cut, lots of Ruby Sapphire. Zach are going to be hoping to dodge that. But perhaps with the techs in the deck, with the Pride Lands and the Sleepy's Flute, they can have a strong enough matchup into Ruby Sapphire. And if they can, Amber Steel Songs looks like it's going to be in a great place. But I think Zach might struggle in day 2. But good luck to him. I'm rooting for him. Playing something different is really, really cool to see. We're going to move on to Emerald Amethyst. 2nd place. Really epic to see these unorthodox decks. I mean, they're obviously popular in the set 3 metagame, but not what you expect to see in the set 4. We are also still later on going to be looking at that Steel Mufasa deck. Don't panic. Second place in the tournament is Emerald Amethyst, and it's a Merfolk deck. And I think there's a really good place in the metagame for Merfolk decks. There are a couple of Merfolk Steel players as well that we're going to be taking a look at later on. Merfolk, of course, incredibly powerful into these Ruby and Sapphire decks, particularly if Ruby Sapphire is not playing the 3-cost uninkable Sisu, which can get rid of the Merfolk. So not too surprised to see Merfolk doing quite well, but of course it's going to struggle, I would imagine, into Bucky decks, but perhaps Chris has got some techs in their deck here to deal with Bucky. They've got a Diablo of their own, but none of the Shift Diablos and none of the Buckies in here. No blue fairies, which I also like to see, despite playing a lot of different Floodborn characters. We have Jacques in here, which is a really curious card. When you play this character, chosen opposing character gains Reckless during their next turn. This card would have been great in the set 3 metagame, because you can play it onto an opponent's Merfolk and it's forced to challenge. I'm not convinced it's getting quite enough value in this current meta, though, for me to personally have put this in my Amethyst Emerald deck. 2 copies of Kit Cloud Kicker, going to be great against opponents' Diablos, opponents' Ursula Deceiver of Alls. 2 Crabs, 2 Mother Knows Best, 2 Tinkerbell, Most Helpful, 2 Pegasus, and really cool to see the 3 copies of Ursula Sea Witch Queen, which of course can be shifted on to this 2-cost Ursula. I love to see Emerald doing well outside of Bucky decks. Big congratulations to Jordan. Really, really rooting for them in day 2. And there was another deck which also was playing the color combination of Emerald and Amethyst. Didn't finish quite as high up in the top 32, but bear in mind, very, very small margins between the top players and the top 32 in this format, where it's the 2-game format. Very, very fine margins indeed. And I have to say, I like the look of this list a little bit more than the other one. If we compare the 1-drops first and foremost, 2 copies of Chernobyls, 4-4 split of Merfolk and Pegasus in Jordan's, which is a split I really like, actually. In this one, it's instead of the Chernobyls, Pascal, which is a really interesting option. I don't have a particular preference. I think they're both great options. Pascal is going to give you, obviously, that little bit of extra opportunity to be a menace against those decks which don't have many answers for evasive, whereas Chernobyls is going to be better for the card draw. Flynn Rider is in this one, whereas in this list it was also in there. 4 Mims, 4 Ursulas, 4 Diablos. So far we're saying 4 friends. Here's where things get different. Instead of these 2 copies of Jacques, we have 2 copies of Hey Hey, which is so exciting to see. When this card was revealed, I absolutely loved the look of it. When you play this character, if an opponent has more cards in their inkwell than you may put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. And it quests for 2. Great card against Sapphire decks, which are ramping, but also a great card when going second on turn 4. Before you ink your Hey Hey, you can play them, most like your opponents at 4 ink or more, and therefore your Hey Hey puts another card, like a Mickey Mouse, into your inkwell, and then you can ink, so you would be ramping while going second as an Emerald player, which is really, really amazing. One of the very few cards in the game which is better when going second, so really, really cool to see. 4 Foxes, 3 Crabs, which is pretty heavy on the Crabs, but that's going to give you good coverage against locations, against things like Robin Hood, maybe Tamatoa as well, which is obviously a pretty popular card. 4 copies of Dolores Madrigal. This is a card I really, really love. It's basically very comparable to a rabbit. It's like a hybrid between a Merlin Rabbit and a Maleficent 3-cost card. The Maleficent 3-cost card is a card I'm pretty low down on because it only quests for 1, whereas Dolores questing for 2, that's twice as good. And I think that's a really, really big deal. It's a card I like a lot. Pretty difficult to fit in a lot of lists. It's one of the kind of cards that you might look at cutting because you already have really good options in at 4 with the goat, with the rabbit, with the castle. But it's a great card and I'm really, really happy to see it. 4 copies of the Shift Pegasus as well as 2 copies of Ursula Sea Witch Queen. If I had to take a pick over the lists here, while this one was the better performing, I like the look of this list significantly more, although I do like the idea of Kit Cloud Kicker as well, which was in the other list. Big congratulations to both Gabrielle and as well to Jordan for their Emerald Amethyst decks making the top cut. Up next we have the 1 Amber Emerald deck, and this is a spicy one, and this is looking very similar to the way I would like to build the list. Definitely some things I don't love about the deck on paper, but let's talk about it because clearly they've done very well with it. And when I say I don't love it, it's maybe just like some nitpicks of things I wouldn't personally go for, but clearly Joseph knows what they're doing. So first and foremost, they have the 1-drop Diablo, but no Bucky. Now, Ariel is in the deck, And Ariel is, of course, in this deck able to sing We Don't Talk About Bruno. She's able to, as well, find Sudden Chill, Bare Necessities, which are great cards. But Painting the Roses Red, which is a set 2 card, which has never seen play, is fascinating at the moment. Because this is a card which is up to 2 chosen characters get -1 strength this turn, and you draw a card. The fact that it replaces itself is really, really big, and it synergizes with the Muses, which is a card I'm really high up on, and is absolutely a card I would want to play in this deck. So I really like the Aerials in there with the Muses, Painting the Roses Red. I've got no issues with that. I really like to see the Prince John as well. I think that's fascinating. 2 copies of You Have Forgotten Me is also fascinating for that turbo discard mode. You can play Prince John on turn 3, You Have Forgotten Me on turn 4. The other thing which is great about You Have Forgotten Me with the Muses, you're bouncing cards back to your opponent's hand with the Muses, but then you just have an absolute abundance of discard with the Sudden Chills, Bare Necessities, and the You Have Forgotten Me. So I really, really, and also the Bruno as well, I really, really love that setup. Now, the thing which caught my eye, which initially I said I don't love the look of, is the Lucifers. But of course, Lucifer plus the Muses is an absolute wombo combo. So I'm eating my words already. I'm seeing the deck and how it's working together. When I've looked at this deck myself, I've been maybe interested in trying to play Bucky and Ariel. Maybe instead of this Flynn Rider, you could try and sneak a Bucky in there. And maybe you would not play Lucifer and Cricky, but Floodborn characters. Maybe like Pegasus, for example. Maybe the 4-cost Ursula, Eric's Bride, potentially as well as a Floodborn option if you go for the Bucky route instead of the Flynn. But obviously Flynn with Prince John's nice. But no. And also worth noting, the Kida is also already a Floodborn, as is the Diablo. That's personally how I would want to test the deck. But the Lucifer Muses combo is so, so cool to see. If you sing 2 songs... I also like, by the way, that there's no Ursula Deceiver of All. I think she's a good cut in this deck. I don't think you need her. Yeah, you bounce back 2 cards with the Muses. Bam! Lucifer. You know it's 2 characters. You draw 2 with Prince John. Pretty cool. Cricky is also a really interesting card. Gives you some board presence, which I like to see. Obviously, buffs up your Ursula Deceiver here to 4/3 stat line for a turn, which is going to be great for clearing stuff. Fascinating list. Of course, 3 copies of Under the Sea, which synergizes really nicely with Kida. I absolutely love it. Personally, I would be tempted in my setup, and I've not tested the deck yet, but I will be testing it soon. It's the main deck I haven't tested, which I'm really interested in, is Bucky for Flynn, and then maybe try and play some more Floodborns, like Ursula Eric's Bride. You can shift it onto the Ursula Deceiver, discard a song card, which you obviously have an abundance of. It's a Floodborn, gives you more discard. I think it could be really, really cool. Apart from that, I absolutely adore it. I think huge shout out to Joseph. Really amazing to see this deck. I'm rooting for you, mate. Best of luck. Up next, we have the other Amber and Steel deck, and it is a Steel Mufasa deck. Mufasa! I didn't say anything. Wow. Okay. So, Mufasa, Steel, and there's lots of songs in here. First and foremost, big shout out to Zach. You have my full respect. Listen, guys, if I ever criticize a deck build, okay, that doesn't mean that I don't have huge respect for them playing it. I just think I'm just looking at this, and my head is struggling to process what I'm looking at. Let's first count the songs, because huge shout out to Zach. This is clearly a serious deck. They're clearly onto something here. 2 Babooms, 2 Strength, that's 4. 3 Whole New Worlds brings us up to 7. We've got 2 Grab Your Swords is 9. Okay, 9 non-character cards. So your Mufasa is still hitting most of the time, obviously, but it is going to miss quite often. But that's fine. People play Ariel when she misses, so I think it's absolutely reasonable to still play Mufasa. Obviously, Mufasa is in the mixer here as a good way of dealing with Be Prepareds without Bare Necessities, without Ursula Deceiver, but also a good way of dealing with the Sisus. So let's then talk about the rest of the deck, because Mufasa isn't really the centerpiece of the deck. It's just a card in the deck, right? Captain Hook, Pluto. So a bit of a control-heavy start. Very slow start, unless you can go Pluto into Doc into Gaston. That's really what this deck, I suppose, from Zach is looking to do. Pluto into Doc into Gaston. So the ramp options, and I think I'm seeing where this deck is coming together. So you go Pluto on 1, and then you go Doc or Gaston on turn number 2, preferably Gaston. And that could, in theory, allow you to play Tinkerbell on turn 3, I think, which would be able to clear Bucky Boy pretty damn quickly. So you go Pluto on 1, Gaston on 2, And then even if your Pluto gets removed, you'd be at 3 ink. Gaston reduces by 2. So you would need both the Pluto and Gaston to stick to get Tinkerbell through on turn 3. In my Steel Amethyst deck, which I alluded to earlier, I'm actually playing 3 copies of the Shift Tink, the 3 cost from set 1 to get an early Tink in. But maybe that's what the deck is looking to achieve. 1 Benger, 2 Magic Brooms. That's going to help you, of course, against the Diablo, but only 2 Babooms. Don't love that. 2 Grab Your Swords, Chen Po, Beast, Simba. I'd be amazed if this deck wins their top 64 game. I'm going to be honest. But who knows? Who knows? Huge respect to Zach. I don't think this deck looks very good, though. I really don't. I think this is an example of a deck which, and I could be wrong. Listen, I might eat my words. I think this is an example of a deck which in a 2,000 player tournament would not have made the top cut. That would be my hunch. But who knows? Let's see. Go on, Zach. I'm super impressed. Sorry, Zach. You have my full respect. Okay, here's the Jafar deck. Is there any set 4 cards in there? No. Not a single set 4 card, which is really, honestly, cool to see. Just shows you that you can still play decks from previous sets, and they're still good. Jafar had a pretty good showing in the challenges at Lille in particular. I'm not sure about Atlanta because obviously I was at Lille. There was a lot of Jafar decks in the Top Cup as I was doing the rounds. And it's a deck which I'm still pretty interested in. Jafar has a special place in my heart. This is a more control-heavy one with Fire the Cannons. No Babooms, so I would probably have expected to see some more Babooms to have more answers to Diablo, perhaps. But 2 Bengers, which is definitely a card I like. I just like these kind of mid-range steel decks on Baboom and Benger, but this one, Fire the Cannons, is great. Smash times 3, and then, of course, the Jafar package with a bit of Merlin. You've got the Blue Fairy with the Beast, with the Grab Swords, the Robin Hood, the Tinker Smells, 2 Yzma. Pretty cool to see. Best of luck, Craig, for day 2. All right, now we've got the Emerald Steel, but this is the Emerald Steel, which is not playing Bucky, which is the ones I'm most interested in. My hot take at the very start of the season was I thought this deck would still be great. The Rat is someone that's well known for playing this deck with the Friar Tucks, with the Merfolk, and lo and behold, they haven't changed the deck at all, really. I mean, there's definitely a few subtle changes, but they're still playing 4 Daisy Ducks, which I've criticised them for playing 4 Daisy Ducks in the past, but they've still got it. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I like it. I really like that the Rat's gone for it here. What I don't like about it is the Captain Hook. I really don't like the Captain Hook. I don't like that there's only 2 Babooms. I would want more Babooms. I would want Pegasus 1-drop for a little bit more aggressive questing. This deck is really an aggro deck at this point, right? I would be really interested to see how the matchup goes against Bucky. I would wager it's pretty weak. I think that's where this deck is going to struggle most. So the Rat probably hoping to dodge Bucky. Bucky decks can shift. Often they're playing Grab Your Swords as well for the mirrors. This deck is going to have a real hard time against Bucky. But against Ruby Sapphire, against Sapphire Steel with the Bengers, it could really, really pop off. So I really like that the Rat's brought it. I really don't like the 4 Daisy Ducks. The main thing is, again, the Captain Hook. I would want to play the 1-drop Pegasus. Absolutely. I think that would be a no-brainer. I'd even be tempted to play the Shift Pegasus perhaps. Trying to think if there's any other set 4 cards which really jump to mind, which I would personally play in this deck. I would play more Babooms, for sure. Really cool deck, though. Big up to the Rat. They like the Daisy Ducks. It's clearly a cool card. Maybe like there's some other discard cards which came in. Maybe like the 5-cost Jasmine. Maybe. She's uninkable, so maybe not. Cool deck. Big up to the Rat. Up in this one, very, very similar list. Also with the hooks, the 2 Babooms. These guys might have even prepped together. But instead of the 3 Daisy Ducks, there's 1 Donald Duck. Honestly, I probably prefer this. 4 Daisy Ducks is just too much. There's no way you ever want 4 Daisy Ducks. I actually do like Daisy Duck. Oh, there's also only 3 Storm Rage on, and there's 2 kits. 2 extra kits, 1 Storm Rage on, 1 Benger. Okay, so I actually prefer the Rats list significantly for one reason and one reason only. Only 3 Storm Rage on, to me, is like playing a Songs deck with a whole new world and only playing 3 whole new worlds. This card is like almost the reason you play this deck. I think it's too good to only play 3 copies. So I do prefer the Rats list. Still am very unconvinced by the Zeus in these decks as well, although it's very good, of course, dealing with the Beast. I really like to see these guys bring in it. Again, I would build it slightly differently. More aggressive, less hook. I really hate the hook. I wasn't even playing hook in set 3. And I think the Pegasus 1-drop is exactly what this deck wants. But big up to these guys. Full respect. Really, really cool to see this deck I built from set 3 still putting in work. Up next, we are on to the more meta decks. But Ruby Amethyst made a real big splash at a big tournament last weekend. It's a deck which has impressed me. The biggest downside of this deck is, my goodness, playing against Bucky can be miserable. I've got some pretty strong opinions on how I would personally build Ruby and Amethyst. And first and foremost, the 1-drops here, I really like the look of. I really like the Chernobog's Brooms setup for this Ruby Amethyst deck. The other thing which is really interesting is the top end. What kind of top end do you go for? Do you go Be Prepared? Do you go Medusa's Tremaines? The Be King Undisputed is a really, really good card. And I am personally of the opinion, having done a lot of testing yesterday, videos coming soon, that Ruby Amethyst might want to drop the Be Prepared entirely, controversial, and instead just be really heavy on Medusa and Tremaine and utilize the bounce package with them a little bit more. The Be Prepareds are really, really bad against Bucky. I think if you want to be good in this metagame, you need to be able to consistently beat Diablo Bucky. And this deck can really, really struggle against it. Teeth and Ambitions, there's no Teeth and Ambitions here, so Kurt deciding maybe they don't even care about Bucky, they accept it's bad. I actually don't think Teeth and Ambitions is particularly good against the Bucky decks anyway, because often they play the 1-cost Diablo, they can see the Teeth and Ambitions in your hand, they can discard it with Ursula Deceiver before they go for the Diablo, for example, right? So I'm not convinced the Teeth and Ambitions is good, and it makes your other matchups worse anyway. So you kind of maybe just have to accept you have a bad matchup. I really like the look of the list, going for Kuzco Crab as the other kind of setup, 3 Be King Undisputed. Personally, I would play 4 of this, and I would consider trying to drop the Be Prepareds for more copies of Tremaine Medusa. Also not sure about the Crab Kuzco personally. Kuzco may be a bit slow, but Kuzco Crab, great combo. Absolutely. I really like this list from Kurt. I think it's a really, really solid build. We're going to kind of skim through these. This one's on 3 Jim Hawkins, which seems outrageous. Why? Like, why? I mean, okay. Jim Hawkins times 1? Absolutely. Times 2? Sure, pushing it. Times 3? That's just not correct. I just can't support that. Sorry. But good job to Adrian. Let's look at the rest of the list, going for Chernobogs and Olaf. They have 2 copies of Teeth, 4 Kuzcos with 2 Crabs. I think if you're going 4 Kuzcos, I'd like to see a few more Crabs. I think playing only 3 Snakes is suboptimal. 3 Brawls, I also don't like. Only 2 Be King Undisputed, I also don't like. And I do like the inclusion of Peter Pan Shadowfinder. Big shout out to Emily Abadira, who I have met a couple times now, who was the artist for both of these. I can absolutely see Peter Pan Shadowfinder making the cut in these lists. It's a rush character which can come down on turn 3 to remove Diablo. I think it's a better answer for Diablo compared with Teeth and Ambitions. Overall, I don't like this setup. There's not that much you can really change in a Ruby Amethyst deck, and pretty much all the things they did change I don't like, with the exception of the Peter Pan. I do also like, though, that they're heavy on the Be Prepareds. They're kind of maybe just accepting that they're bad into Bucky decks, perhaps, although they have Teeth. So that's a bit conflicting to play 4 Be Preps and the Teeth. So I don't actually like this setup too much from Adrian overall. But congratulations to them. Clearly they know what they're doing. Again, just if I criticize a deck doesn't mean that the player's bad, and it doesn't mean the deck is bad. It's just my personal opinions. I think it's interesting to share. This one's on a lot of 1-drops, which I actually really like to see. A lot of these decks, if you look, I mean, with the Kuzco, you have a lot of 2-drops, but a lot of them are only on 8 1-drops. Oh, there's also no Flynn Rider in this deck. Yeah, I don't like this build. This one is also not on Flynn Rider, but has lots of 1-drops with the Olaf, Pascal, Rafiki. I don't like the choice of 1-drops here. I do like to see Pinocchio, Rafiki, though. Pinocchio, Rafiki, and Pascal I can get behind. I really like Chernobogs, and I really like the Magic Brooms over Olaf, especially if you're not playing Teeth. But obviously Olaf can't be removed by things like Baboom. That's one upside. I do like to see a return for Pinocchio Rafiki. I think Pinocchio was really the star of the show in Lille in particular. It just had such a big performance throughout the weekend. This one on Crabs, on Minnie Mouses. I like to see the more aggressive Minnie Mouses making a return. Pretty difficult to remove for a lot of meta decks, to be completely fair. Lots of decks focusing on that 2 damage removal. So I'm really, really happy to see Minnie making a comeback. Obviously, a lot of the other decks prefer to go for Sisu on turn 3, Frenemy on turn 2. This one's on 3 Tremaines, 3 Medusas, 3 B Preps, which is a pretty aggressive split and only 3 castles. I like the setup. It's a nice build from George. Personally, probably not how I would go for it. Again, I like the Frenemy setup, but honestly, I like it a lot. I like the Mini. I like it. Up next, we've got Edmund on the Chernobog's Brooms, which is something I'm more a fan of as the one-drop package in this meta. I think Ruby Amethyst really needs to be quite quick. Also, these cards are pretty strong into Bucky because you can empty your hand and then draw with them potentially. 4 Cuzcos to go with 0 crabs with no copies of Frenemy Sisu. I don't like the Maleficent Sorceress. I think this card is too weak these days, too slow. Teeth and Ambitions, sure. It gives you some chance against Diablo, but as I mentioned, I think it's kind of a dream. I think that you maybe just have to accept that you can't remove Diablo that easily with this deck and go for the Pan Shadow Finder, the 3 cost instead. Then that's your best bet, really. 3 Terrains, 3 Medusas, 3 B Preps, no B King. I don't like the setup overall. Overall, we've got Albert with Minnie Mouse, Rafiki, 2 Pinocchios. This is like a set 3 build, right? 1 Spellbook. I really like Spellbook in this metagame. 3 Maleficents, 4 Maui, 2 Tremaine, 3 Medusa, 3 Beef Reds. No Frenemy, no Sisu 3 cost either. Interesting build. More like a set 3 build, right? But that's fine. It's clearly done well. Up next, we've got Christopher. Christopher's build is really, really spicy. Let's have a look. First thing that jumps to mind is the Milan 1-drop to allow you to have the Milan shift target in. The weird thing about the Milan 1-drop is that it is not got any healing potential in this deck, which is obviously a concern. But it does have a good stat line still. You could kind of treat it as a 2-1 if you're never healing it. Definitely unorthodox. They do have the Frenemy, they do have the Sisu, they do have the B King Undisputed. They also have the 4 copies of Pegasus, which again, as I've mentioned, I don't think it's actually giving you enough coverage against the Diablo because they can remove it quite comfortably with damage very, very often. Let the Storm Rage on. Strength of Raging Fire can be sung by Diablo to remove this Pegasus. So personally, I think it's a pipe dream. Again, as I mentioned, I do think the Magic Broom in Steel with a 2-3 stat line is more reasonable because it can't be removed by Let the Storm Rage On being sung by Diablo. So personally, I don't like the Pegasus. I don't think I like the Milan either. In truth, I would prefer something like Pascal, something like the Magic Brooms. As a 1-drop, maybe Rafiki, but probably Magic Brooms and Pascal would be my priority because I do think this deck needs to be quite quick. I like the 3 copies of B King Undisputed. I think you could make a case to go to 4. I also do like what they've done here, which is go for Tremaine with B King Undisputed. I think that B King Undisputed plus Tremaine gives you a lot of value, right? Like they benefit each other. You can sing B King on Merlin, play a Tremaine, and that's removing, let's say if your opponent's got Beast and Robin Hood, that's removing both, right? A lot of players will try and play around B King by playing a weak card, and then if you got B King and Tremaine coming through on the same turn, you remove the weak card to get the powerhouse card, and then you maybe win the game. The 2 Milans, 3 B Preps, 1 Scar, only 2 castles. Very, very interesting build. I like the Goofies for a little bit more aggro. Overall, though, I don't like the Milan. I don't like the Pegasus. Where's Medusa? Come on. I think you've got to be playing Medusa, to be fair. Up next, we've got Garrett, who's on the Chernobog's Magic Broom with 3 Olafs. So that's 11 1-drops. No, 9 1-drops. Maths is hard. 4 Flins, 2 Cuzco. Only 3 snakes, which I really hate to see people cutting snakes. I think it's a huge mistake. I think it's just really, really bad. Like, you need the snake goats in the late game in so many matchups for this deck. You need the rabbit snake as well. I think you always play 4 snakes. I think it's uncuttable in my opinion. 2 crabs with 2 Cusco. Does have the Sisu. Does have Peter Pan's Shadow instead of the Shadow Finder. Shadow is definitely a better card overall because it quests for twice as much. It allows your Fox to be evasive, so its ability is more relevant. But the problem is it comes through a turn later than the Shadow Finder. So the Shadow Finder can remove Diablo a turn sooner, which is obviously a significant deal. So I do think I prefer the Shadow Finder as a medical. 1 Pepper Madrigal. Oh my goodness, that's spicy. This is like an expensive Pinocchio. When you play this character, you may exert chosen opposing character. That character can't ready at the start of their next turn unless they're at a location. So it's like a Pinocchio that's more expensive, but it stops them for a whole turn, right? They don't ready. So that's really, really cool to see 1 copy of Pepper. Very, very cool. Big up to Garrett. Have we got more Ruby and Amethyst decks? We do. This one with Medallion Weights. What? Why? Medallion Weights in Amethyst makes no sense to me. Medallion Weights if you're playing Ruby Steel and you're really lacking card draw, sure. But in a Amethyst deck, there's no way that's correct, in my opinion. if I'm honest. Chernobog's Olaf Pascal, no copies of the Magic Broom. We've got the Flynn Rider into the Sisu. Only 3 copies of Sisu, though. If you're playing Flynn, I think you probably want to play 4 of this, but I can see the logic of only playing 3. They can get very, very bad in the late game if your opponent dumps the hand. Cool to see the Fishhook in the mixer. That's definitely a nice option. As well as Beaking Undisputed, 1 Goofy, 2 B-Preps, 3 Medusas, no Tremaines. Okay, so overall, the Ruby and Amethyst deck, I think the one I liked the look of the most was the one that was playing Tremaines and Beaking Undisputed. This one's on Medusa, the Maleficent. I think it was kind of early on, right? Let's have a look. Which one did I like the most? I quite like this setup. This was clean. Adrian's, I didn't like the Jim Hawkins. This one I quite like as well, even though it's not playing the frenemy. I think that's reasonable. Definitely lots of different ways you can go about it. So maybe I'll give the first one we looked at, which was the top 16 build. I'll maybe give my stamp of approval to as my favorite setup. I think this looks pretty smooth. I do like Tremaines maybe instead of B-Preps as an idea. Not done that much testing, just something that in the testing I have done I've been quite impressed with it. But big up to Kurt, big up to all the players on Ruby Amethyst. We're 35 minutes into the video, and it's finally time for me to roast the DeCandio deck building. So DeCandio, very, very good player, made the top 8. What a player. They're on Sapphire Steel, which, if it wasn't for my kind of off-meta Amethyst Steel pick, I would have picked Sapphire Steel. I think it's great. It would be my top pick for favorite to win the event, even though there's only 8 decks in the form. I think 8 or 9 decks that made the top cut. It's very, very good into Bucky. It's very, very good into Ruby Sapphire as well. Now, these decks are pretty tight. There's 2 different main ways you can go about building this deck, which is one with 1 jump ahead, one with Mickey Mouse. I think that the 1 jump ahead decks are looking stronger at the moment, to be fair. I think it's the way I would go. The big benefit of the 1 jump ahead is, of course, you can play, if you've missed your Fishbone Quill, you can play something like a Grandma Tala or Flavisham on turn number 3, and then you could maybe even start singing things like How Far I'll Go, potentially, as an option, but also Zeus. Brennan, not with How Far I'll Go. Now, why am I roasting the deck? Because, well, these decks, there's so many cards that you just have to play that there's not that much wiggle room. For example, the Fortifiers, the Popsicles, you're always playing all of these. You're always playing 4 copies of Quill, 4 Flavishams. You're always playing... Usually, you'd always play 4 Whole New Worlds, 2 Dimes, you know. So there's also things that pick themselves, right? But the things that DeCandio has put in, which are not kind of staples, there's very few of them I like. Let's start off with Scuttle. Now, DeCandio knows that I was roasting Scuttle because his game was on stream and it was with a delay, so he was in the chat kind of watching it. And when he played Scuttle, I was like, not the Scuttle. I think it hit when we were watching, and might have even hit a Fishbone Quill. So obviously, Scuttle, if you play it on turn 2 and you hit a Fishbone Quill that you otherwise didn't have, it's great. The problem is, Scuttle is missing so often, it just can't be good, in my opinion. It's just going to lose you game. It's going to lose you way more games than it's going to win you games. That's basically my way of looking at it. So you've got 8 items here. That brings us to 12. That's 14. Now, I don't have the exact maths, but 14 items is roughly somewhere between like 68 to 70%, that kind of ballpark, in terms of the percentage of chance that you're hitting an item with Scuttle. And obviously you have knowledge that could be more, because if you have a hand with no items in, then it's like 53 cards, right? Rather than a 60 card deck, which increases the odds. So there's definitely maths you can do with Scuttle to know when it's better to ink it and when it's better to play it to increase those odds. But that is, let's even put that to 80%. Even if Scuttle's hitting 80% of the time, which he isn't, not even close, but let's say he is, hypothetically, that sounds kind of good, right? Well, my way of looking at it is he misses 20% of the time. That's really bad. 1 in 5 games, he's still going to miss, even if you're at 80%, which he's not. He's significantly lower. I just don't think it's worth the risk. I really, really don't think this deck needs to take such a risk on this card. I think there's so many better options. I do not like it, personally. I'm a Scuttle hater. Now, the Magic Broom, I was also quite critical of in the stream when he played it, but to be honest, I think it's fine. It can sing 1 jump ahead. I would rather see 4 Magic Brooms, to be honest, rather than 2 Brooms, 2 Scuttle. The Magic Broom has this 3 willpower, so it's very, very hard for Diablo to remove it. So it's an interesting option. Again, with these cards, you can sing 1 jump ahead in it. I actually don't hate the Magic Broom at all. I do hate the Scuttle, though. However, The card I hate most of all is the Beast Thick-Skinned. I have to ask DeCandio why on earth he's playing this card. I don't understand. Why is this card in the deck? It has resist 1. You are playing a 1 jump ahead Fishbone Quill deck. Why would you play a 3-cost character which literally does nothing? There's no shift target. I don't understand at all. I really, really don't. DeCandio is such a good player, but his deck building drives me up the wall. Sorry, DeCandio. Big respect. 1 Rise of the Titans, no Avalanche. Avalanche is personally what I would go for because it's able to remove Bucky, for example. Obviously, the big downside of Avalanche compared with Rise of the Titans is Avalanche is uninkable. But yeah, nice to see a Rise of the Titans in there. I think not playing any location removal in this deck would be a mistake. I actually think you could make a case to maybe play 1 Rise, 1 Avalanche, because I think 2 Avalanche is also an interesting option. Important to remember when you have Fishbone Quill, of course, you can ink it. 2 Zeus, 2 Talas, 4 Flavisham, 3 Grab Your Swords. We do see some players playing 4. Also only 3 Babooms. I think 3 Babooms is a solid amount. 2 Let It Goes, only 2 Aerials, only 3 Tamatoas. Obviously, DeCandio is a great player. He might well win the whole tournament. But what is this Beast Thick-Skin doing? At least you can make an argument for the Scuttle. 3 Smash as well, by the way, we didn't talk about. It's interesting to see. But what is this doing here, mate? All right, let's move on. Let's move on before I get hate mail from the DeCandio fans, which there is deservedly a lot of. He's a great player. Orion up next, also in the top 8. This one is also on 1 jump ahead, but is playing Smee. I mean, Smee? Smee? No, Scuttle. What, bro? It drives me crazy. It really does. We have Avalanche in this one with 3 copies of Bell. Now, Bell, when you're playing 1 jump ahead, is a really interesting card because you can 1 jump into Bell and then utilize her Read a Book ability, which is allowing you to ink an extra card from hand per turn. So she's like a bonus ramp tool. Obviously, a great dime target too. So 3 Bells is pretty cool to see. So far, I like everything I've seen, except only 3 copies of 1 jump ahead. Just play 4 1 jump aheads, in my opinion. That's the one thing I don't like. But I like this early setup. This looks similar to something I would consider playing. I think in at 4 instead of Bell, you could look at Grammatala. I think you could even maybe consider the 4-drop Aurora, but I would probably prefer the, which doesn't allow your opponents to target your items, and you can exert each of your items every turn to look at the top and bottom card of the deck. So if you've got like 4 items with the Aurora, you can exert them all to look at the top and the bottom 4 times. And it quests for 2. Personally, I would pick Bell or the Tala over that, though. I do like the Bell option, absolutely. I think it's really, really nice to see. 2 Beast Hard-Headed, card I love at the moment, really good in mirrors. 3 Beast Tragic Hero, not convinced I would personally play Tragic Hero in this deck myself. 3 Cogsworth, I would play 4. 3 Grab Your Swords. 4 Let It Goes, that's insane. 2 Hades, so a big control take on this one. With 3 Tamatoas, 3 Aerials, 2 Dimes. I like the setup overall. I really, really do. The main thing, personally, I don't like is only 3 Cogsworths. 4 Let It Goes, 2 Hades is fascinating. I'm really, really excited to see that kind of approach in action. But I really like the build overall. Again, the main thing that jumps out, Beast, Tragic Hero. I don't know. I think you'd rather have something which can't be brawled. Brawl Ice blocked, for example, can't be Medusa'd. I think you always play the 4 Cogsworth. I'd be more tempted to play more Beast Hard-Headeds before the Beast Tragic Hero, personally, at the moment in this deck. But you really can't go wrong with Beast Tragic Hero. I really like the setup overall. Big thumbs up from me. All right, up next we have Ben, who is on 1 jump aheads also. 2 Avalanche, which is personally what I would play. 3 Zeus, not a big fan of. I do like the Judy Hops. The Bell, the Grammatala, both in there. I do like the How Far I'll Go as well. Couple copies. I think this card's great if you're playing the 1 jump ahead setup. Being able to sing it with Flavisham and Tala is really cool. Only 2 Cogsworth seems a little bit low. No Whole New Worlds. This is the first non-Whole New World version of the... Oh my goodness, okay. Orion's also not playing Whole New World. That's really, really fascinating. So, few versions of the deck not playing Whole New World. Really, really fascinating to see. Whole New World, obviously, is giving you a lot of problems against Ruby Sapphire, potentially. But also, it can be good because it allows you to find your dime, for example, if you're really digging for it. So, no Whole New World is fascinating. I'm unconvinced, but it's definitely a really, really interesting approach to see. Very, very cool. And I think with the Grammatalas, with the How Far I'll Go, I would be more interested in playing the Whole New World with Talas and How Far I'll Go, rather than this setup that Orion's got with no Talas, no How Far I'll Go. So I actually don't love the build from Orion overall. On reflection, realizing that there's no Whole New World I like the concept of it, for sure. But I think they're lacking a little bit in card draw. I also like to see Judy Hopps in there. I think it's a good card. Up next, this one also on No Whole New World, but this one on Tala and on How Far I'll Go. So I'm liking this one more already. It did finish lower. It's got 2 Rise of the Titans instead of the Avalanche, which is fine. Maybe a 1-1 split could be cool. Also very heavy on the Let It Goes. 4 How Far It Goes, 4 Talas, I actually really like. I also, again, the Beast makes a lot more sense if you're not playing A Whole New World. So I like to see the Beast Tragic Heroes in here if you're not playing A Whole New World. This list looks clean to me. 4 Let It Goes is a lot. That's a lot of Let It Goes. Not sure I would personally play that many Let It Goes, but I really like this list. 4 Babooms. I like the developer brains. Scott, this is a clean list, mate. Thumbs up from me. If I was to play a non-Whole New World version of the deck, my list would look similar. Probably not 4 Let It Goes though, mind you. But good job, Scott, on the deck build. I think it's really, really solid. This one is on A Whole New World. It is on 1 Jump Ahead, but only 3 of them. 2 Rise of the Titans, no Avalanche. 2 Zeus, obviously you can sing it with Tyler Flaversham. No How Far I'll Go, which probably makes sense if you're playing Whole New World. 2 Beast, 4 Cogsworth, 1 Let It Go. Only 1 Aerial. I want to see more Aerials. 2 Hades, solid looking list. We're going to skim through these because they're going to start looking pretty similar. 1 Fire the Cannons. There is A Whole New World in here from Connor. 1 Let It Go, only 1 Aerial. Nothing too exciting here. 3 Zeus seems like a lot to me. 1 Fire the Cannons. 4 Whole New Worlds. 3 Bells, 1 Jump Ahead. Why are people playing Beast Thick Skin? It's driving me crazy. What am I missing, guys? What on earth is that card in this deck? It makes no sense. Up next, we've got Josh on Fire the Cannons. 4 1 Jump Aheads. 4 Talas, 4 Bells, but playing the Whole New World. I do like the idea of playing Tala, How Far I'll Go, Whole New World, honestly. It's pretty interesting. But this one's on Whole New World still. I think that's also very reasonable. 4 Zeus. Bro. I can't get behind that. I can't get behind that. It's very uninkable. Obviously, okay, you have Fishbone Quill, but I mean, it's interesting. I would prefer the 4 Let It Goes to 4 Zeus, probably, right? Like, it's inkable. But very cool to see, nonetheless. All right, up next, we've got Sky, friend of the channel. Does a lot of Lorcana content. He just about squeezed into the top 64 while I think he was on the bubble, which I don't know this kind of information for a lot of the players, but Sky is someone that I wanted to pay attention to. Very interesting list with no Whole New World. I'm going to be honest, I don't like the list. Sky's probably going to be unsurprised to hear that. He's on Mickey, which is cool to see. Sky's kind of like the GOAT of Sapphire Steel. He's on 2 Fire the Cannons, 2 Develop Your Brains. He's on Magic Broom ×3, which is interesting. No Babooms. Bro, he's always been a Baboom hater, but I love Baboom. Mickey Mouse, Beast, Cogsworth, Aerial ×3, which I like to see. I really was high up on this card for a long time and told him that he needed to start playing Aerials and Tamatoas. He's got 2 of the Simbas, 3 Hades. To be honest, I don't really like the list. I think if you're going no Whole New World, I definitely like the idea of going 1 Jump Ahead and Grammar Talas and How Far I'll Go. Sorry, Sky. I really hope Sky wins. Sky's probably the person I would like to win the most in the event. All right, now on to the more boring decks, if I'm honest. We have the Emerald, Steel, Bucky decks, and then the Ruby Sapphire decks. So let's skim through these because they're going to look all very similar, you would wager. We've got Arfan and Flattenham, which banishes all items. 2 Flynn Riders, which is obviously a Floodborn. 2 Grab Your Swords. Going to skim through these. 2 Coves. Hidden Cove, I think, is great. Ursula in this one. I would always play Ursula, Deceiver of All. Having done a lot of testing against this deck, I think she's too good to cut. 2 Grab Your Swords. This one here from Raymond. Nothing really jumps out. 2 Zeus. Personally, I'm not a believer of Zeus. I think there's better options. No Ursula, Deceiver of All, I think is a mistake, personally. This one's on Cove. No Ursula, but on 3 Flynn Riders. Nothing else really jumping out here. This one's cool from Josh because it has Flynn Rider here. Apologies for the profanity there that just kind of snuck in. I was unaware. Yeah, let's move on. We've got our next Green Steel. I'm going to ask Inkdex to make sure we're blurring that moving forward. We've got a little bit of Pegasus in this one. We've got Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire. We've got Beast, Tragic Hero, Grab Your Swords. Nothing jumping out at me that's too interesting. This is why I said this is kind of the boring part of the video. This deck kind of builds itself. 3 so 4 Sudden Chills is a lot in this one from Jonathan Crow. Two Coves from Troy. Sure. Let's skim through these. Nothing really jumping out to me on any of these, really. Very, very cookie cutter. There's Morph in this one. One copy of Morph with no Tinkerbells. This one's on two Morphs. This one's called the Mirror Crusher because it's got two Morphs. It's got three Tinkerbells, and it's got two copies of Aerial Sonic Warrior. So this is a more spicy build for sure. I like the idea. The problem with the Morph is it's probably getting removed, but you're also overloading the removal with things like Diablo and Ursula. So if you can obviously shift Morph, Tink, time 4, kind of GG. I like the idea of Aerial Sonic Warrior. Cool deck. All right. I think we're on to Ruby Sapphire. We are Ruby Sapphire Scuttle. No! Don't play Scuttle, mate. Don't know how many times I can say it before people start listening. Scuttle, the idea of Scuttle in this one is it can fish for your lucky dime in the late game. You're not going to be playing it early, most likely. Obviously, it can sing one jump. I mean, maybe you're playing it early. There's only 2 copies of it, but this one's going to be on even less items. 7, 11, 13. You're going to miss a Scuttle a lot, but it can fish for your dime, so sure. The rest of the list, I mean, there's very, very few options in this deck, really. The deck is so refined and so like tightly knit that there's very few tech options. It's like a 58 card deck. So why would you pick the 2 cards to be Scuttle? It drives me crazy. I blame Moyen. Moyen put Scuttle in this deck, and I think it's absolutely awful. Really, really bad. Anyway, moving on. Only 3 Develop Your Brains. This one's on 1 Judy Hops. 2 of the 3 cost Sisus that are inkable. Moana? Why? I mean, okay, it can deal with Diablo, but I think this deck just wants to deal with Diablo by turbo ramping. I think this card's going to be super bad in the mirror. Again, kind of not that many tech options in the deck. Why would you pick Moana? I struggle to support that. Our next, Jose, Vitalosphere. Not a card I'm huge on, but obviously a card which is cheap with Flavisham, and you can give it to your Maui to remove a castle in a single turn. You can also give it to like a Sisu, which will come in at 7 strength to remove a castle in a single turn. That's pretty cool. So I can see the utility of it. Only 3 How Far I'll goes, but 1 Tremaine, 3 B preps. Like the setup on this one. Only 1 ice block. Yeah, that's there's no way that's correct. I think even 2 ice blocks is pushing it. I think I would not go below 3 personally. I know we've seen a lot of players at the top ranks on 2, but I don't know, man. I think 3 is the minimum I would go to personally. 2 Judy Hops as the tech options in this one. I can get behind that. 2 Tremaine, 2 Be Prepareds. I like the setup here. From Scott. This one is Tianu on 1 Tremaine, 2 ice blocks, 2 of the inkable Sisus. I can get behind this one as well. Again, very, very little differences in these ones. This one's on Great Stone Dragon for a different ramp option. Only 3 How Far I'll go I really don't like. 3 inkable Sisu I can support though. No Tremaines, which makes me a little bit sad. But 3 Be Prepared. 3 Vitalosphere in this one. Only 3 one jump ahead. Be King Undisputed. Okay, this is a spicy list. This is a real spicy list from Joseph Johnson. Really, really throwing out the kind of cookie cutter versions. So what are we sacrificing here to fit B King in? It is a card I like, but no Tremaines. I think like if you're playing B King, you also play Tremaine is my kind of opinion. Only 3 Maui. 3 Vitalosphere. Only 3 one jump aheads. Only 3 Fishbone. Yeah, I don't know about that. 2 Scuttles. Guys, please stop playing Scuttle. I'm a Scuttle hater. This one's on 3 Sisu. I really do blame Jan. A very good friend of the channel. And yeah, we kind of built the deck together. Like the 60, we kind of agreed on it. And then he removed, I think, like the 2 uninkable Sisus for 2 Scuttles. And it's like, bro, please. 3 B preps, 3 inkable Sisu. I can get behind this list. Only 2 ice blocks. I would like to see 3. I really, really would. Up next, we have Ryan on 3 Vitalosphere, 2 Scuttle, bro. 2 Aurora, Maurice's Workshop. Okay, Ryan. Ryan, Scuttle is good. Okay, Scuttle in this deck, I can support. Scuttle is a good card in the right build, maybe. And a deck which plays Maurice's Workshop is maybe that kind of deck. Ryan, this is spicy. I can support this. So I do think that Scuttle could be good in a deck which is not playing like Whole New World and just lots of items, for example, in like Sapphire Steel. Maurice's Workshop is whenever you play another item, you may pay 1 to draw a card. So lots of items. We've got 7, 10, 14, 17, 19. Scuttle here's solid. This is more like the kind of ballpark you're looking at. That's like 74% roughly, if I'm not mistaken. Hits rate on Scuttle, still 25% miss rate, by the way. But that's a lot more reasonable, and there's only 2 of them. The Aurora is super spicy. I mentioned her earlier. My friend Lenny loves this card. Big shout out to Lenny. He calls her Furora, because she's 4-cost Aurora. Furora, I think it's kind of cool. So this is questing for 2. Opponent can't banish your items, and every turn you can exert each of your items to look at the top and bottom card of your deck and put one on the bottom, one on the top. Pretty cool. Very, very spicy list. Big up to Ryan. I imagine it's not optimal compared to these other lists, in truth, because you're sacrificing... What are you sacrificing, really? That's a good question. What are you sacrificing? There's still Sisus in here. There's none of the 3... There is. What is being sacrificed here? Develop Your Brain is still in there as well. Maui's in there. You're sacrificing How Far I'll Go, which I think is a big miss. You're sacrificing the Grammar Tala, but instead of that, you get Maurice's Workshop card draw. Only 2 Maleficent Monstrous Dragons also feels bad. Really, really cool list, though, from Ryan. I wonder how this would perform in the mirror. Really cool to see. Big up, Ryan. All right, we've got Tommy Williams. This one is on 4 How Far I'll Goes. 2 Icebox, 2 Judy Hops as the tech options. And this one, 4 Medusa. 4 Be Prepareds. No Tremaine. Sure. 3 Ice Blocks, 2 Judy Hops, 3 Sisus, 2 Bells. Wow. Okay, Bell is interesting. 3 How Far I'll Goes. 3 Tremaines, 3 Medusas, 3 Be Prepared, 2 Sisus, no Develop Your Brains. So being a bit greedy to cut the consistency to fit in more big, powerful cards. I mean, it looks good when you're looking at all these really powerful cards, but Develop Your Brain is also just consistency. You just find what you want when you need it. So I think cutting Develop Your Brain is a mistake. Up next, we've got Dylan Brown on 2 copies of Cruella. I've mentioned this card before, as well as the 2-cost Jafar. I don't think it's a good option, as well as the 2-cost Pegasus to be dealing with Diablo, because they can just sing Storm Rage on Strength of the Raging Fire and remove it. And it's really, really bad in every other matchup. So I don't like the Cruella. I don't like the Moana, and therefore I don't like the list, because again, these lists are very tight. Not many tech options. Up next, we have Scott, who's on 2 Ice Blocks, 3 of the Inkable Sisus, 1 Tremaine, 3 Be Prepared, 3 Medusas. Solid enough list. Can't really argue with that. 1 Great Stone Dragon in here. Only 3 How Far I'll Goes. Only 2 Ice Blocks. 3 Be Prepared, 3 Medusas. Now we're getting on to the higher finishing ones after this, I think, for Ruby Sapphire. We're on 2 Ice Blocks, 1 Judy Hops. Sure. Up next, we're on Blake, who's on 2 of each of the Sisus, which I can kind of get behind. 1 Aero, I think, is spicy. I can support that. No Tremaines. Oh, 1 Tremaine. 2 B Preps. 3 Sisu. Only 2 Develop Your Brains. So cutting some corners there. Only 2 How Far Goes. I do like to see these Sisus in here. I really like the Sisu Daring Visitor. I think it's a necessary evil to deal with the more aggressive decks. Having played a lot of aggro against Ruby Sapphire, if they don't have this Sisu, I'm probably winning most of the time. Certainly if I'm going first. All right, but now we're on to the decks which perform a bit better for Ruby Sapphire. This came 3rd, and this is a spicy list. First time seeing it, but I already like the look of it. I really, really do. I don't like the Cruella, for reasons mentioned, but it's another Scuttle deck, which I can support if you're going Maurice's Workshop and really in on the items. And the Queen's in here, which is a really interesting card. I don't like the Queen in Ruby in Sapphire Steel, because there's more card draw options. But in a deck where you're struggling for card draw, the Queen Scuttle package with Maurice's Workshop is super fascinating. So the Queen is exerting once per turn. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal an item card, put it into your hand. If the item costs 3 or less, you may play it for free instead, and it enters play exerted. That is spicy. Let's look at the amount of items, because obviously Scuttle and the Queen are doubling down, and also 1 copy of Medallion Weight, which I was critical of in a Ruby Amethyst deck, because you have card draw, but in Ruby Sapphire, with Maurice's Workshop, Flaversham, and the Queen and Scuttle, sure. What does Fang do, by the way? Fang's crossbow. Exert, spend 2 ink, chosen character gets -2 strength this turn. Banish this item, banish... So you're spending 2, chosen character gets -2. So it's like a ice block that's way more expensive. I don't know, why not just play a full fire block, in my opinion? In truth, that would be my take. How many items? Let's look. 7, 8, 9... 13, 15, 18, 20. So it's like 80% hit rate on Scuttle and Queen. Very, very spicy. We're on Sisu, big shift Sisu times 3, 3 Maleficents, 1 B Prep, 3 Medusa, only 3 Maui. I think that's kind of fine. You wouldn't usually like that, but if you're trying to get more items in. The one thing I just don't like about the deck is the Corella. The other interesting synergy with the Queen and Great Stone Dragon is this card already enters play exerted. So the Queen making it enter play exerted is not a downside whatsoever. Really fascinating list. Big up to Brandon getting third. I really wonder how this performs in the mirror. I could see it being pretty damn good. I like it a lot. Again, the Corella. One thing I don't like, really. Up next, we have in the top 4 a Maui's Fishhook, 2 Judy Hops, 1 Scar build of the deck. 2 Tremaines, 2 Medusa, 3 B Preps. Something's been cut here to fit in all of this. But I can't quite put my finger on it. Not sure. Not sure. 2 Judy Hops. 1 Fishhook. Ah, maybe not. 1 Scar. There's like some top end that's been cut, right? There's no Talas. There's no Grandma Talas. That's what's been... There is Talas. What's been cut from this deck? Okay, this is going to drive me insane if I can't work it out. Dime is still in there. Maleficent. Tamatoa? Don't tell me they're playing more than 60. What am I missing? It feels like they have so many cards here. Is it really more than 60? I'm going to have to count up, aren't I? 4, 8, 10, 11, 13, 16, 18, 20, 24, 27, 31, 35, 37, 38, 40, 44, 48, 52, 56, 62. I don't know. I do not want to talk about it, okay? I do not want to talk about it. If you're wondering why I'm mad, I mean, it's not a big deal, but playing more than 60 cards is like a cardinal sin for me. It's like, what does this deck want to do? It wants to play 1 jump ahead on turn 2, Fishbone Quill on turn 3. So playing more than 60. Maybe I added up wrong, but I don't think I did because it looked like it was fitting a lot in. You just decrease your odds of finding these cards. You could almost look at it like you have 2 less mulligans than your opponent, kind of, almost, possibly, maybe. I don't know. I just don't like it. Just cut the cards, man. Just find something to cut. Like, if you really want to play all of this, just play, like, 2 less develop your brains. If you really, really want to do that, right? I don't know. Seems weird to me. Although I really like develop your brain, I wouldn't cut it. Like, I don't know. I know it's hard to cut stuff, but just do it. Just work it out. Just don't play 62 cards. Please! Fair play, though. I respect it. It's not the biggest deal. I just don't like it personally. I would never do it myself unless I'm playing a mill deck or something. Chris Anderson, who is on Queen of Hearts, Shield of Virtue, Bell, Let It Go, Mukduk Manor, 4 B Preps. This is a spicy list. This looks like one which would be pretty good in the mirror, I would wager, with lots of B Prepareds and the Mukduk Manors. This one is not playing... what's it not playing? Develop Your Brain has been cut, sure. If you want to fit lots of different stuff in. It's on 3 Let It Goes as well. There's lots of stuff missing from here. Don't tell me it's another deck more than 40. More than 60. What's this missing? Is it Brawl? No Ice Blocks, no Brawls. Honestly, I actually quite rate it. I don't know if it's optimal. Definitely very different. And removing those 8 cards, you get a lot more different options, like big B Prepareds. The Diablos are playing around the Brawls very well with the Cove. Very fascinating take from Chris Anderson. I respect it. I absolutely do. Justin up next on the 2 Ice Blocks. 3 Sisu uninkable, 3 Sisu inkables, basically cutting a How Far I'll Go to fit the 4th. No Tremaines, 3 Be Prepared. And finally, in the top 16, also the ordering was a bit weird here. We have 2 Great Stone Dragons as the tech option, which is cool to see. 3 How Far I'll Go, as well as 3 Be Prepared. No Tremaines for Medusa. All right. Woo! Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. I'm so excited to see which deck wins. My prediction for which deck wins looking at this tournament is, I don't know. I'm still going to pick Sapphire Steel because it was my pick from the start. Which Sapphire Steel deck do I think is going to win? Just based off which deck I think is built best. I could see a non-Whole New World deck taking it, you know. I want to see a non-Whole New World deck with 1 jump aheads, Grandma Tala, How Far I Go. Having looked through all of these lists and done a lot of testing yesterday with Sapphire Steel, with my buddies, I think that could be the way to go. So this one's on 1 jump ahead, Grandma Tala, How Far I'll Go. So maybe Ben Fishman. Is there another? Oh, this one looks nice from Scott. Scott Page, maybe. All right. I mean, I don't know how good Scott Page is at the game, but Scott Page, you have my favorite deck of the tournament. As in deck I like the most, as in like one that which I think could win, I guess. Because I mean, obviously I like the more spicy stuff a bit more, but yeah. Big shout out to everyone, all the players, all the judges, all the staff over, all the casters, all the viewers over in Chicago. Hope you guys have a lovely weekend. See you guys very soon for more talk about all these decks after the top 64 has happened. One love. Bye.